Welcome to the shop. So we just rebuilt this plane. It was busted in half, pieces and parts all over. Electronics were shot. Some of the cords, some of the extensions for the servos went through the EDF. So rebuilding a lot of different pieces and parts, a lot of techniques along the way. Again, a week ago, my buddy gave this to me in a trash bag. So it was is in bad shape. But I thought, you know what? Great YouTube content. Always looking for something. So I take you along with me on all the different techniques I use to put things back together. A lot of details. So there's going to be a lot of things in there that you might find useful. Hope you learned something. If you have a question, leave a comment, like, subscribe, all that cool stuff. Makes me feel good about doing these videos. Appreciate it. Stick around. All right, so you're dealing with this. You're dealing with a plane and parts. First thing I do is, one is do just kind of that rough assessment, right? What are all the pieces that are busted? Try looking at what still works, what doesn't work, what got ripped apart, what's going to have to be repaired either from a gluing perspective or in some cases maybe redoing some of the electronics. Somehow the elevator extension cable, it looks like ran through the ducted fan, so we'll see how that turns out. Obviously, there's going to be some creative gluing. Luckily, I just finished up my tests, and I'll be using E6000 for repairing this. It looks awful, but really, there's not that many parts to glue back together. You have the fuselage, and it's a clean break. I haven't done a test fit yet, but it looks pretty good. Then you're looking at part of the fuselage here, the back end, the tail nozzle. This we'll do some work with a little hot water, see if we can get those wrinkles out. Yeah, here it took a little impact. Might have to repaint some of this, which isn't a big deal, but it's not as horrible as it initially looks. So again, the first thing I'm going to do is kind of break them down into individual components. Right now, I'm going to test to see, do the landing gear still work? They probably do. Some of the electronics, things got yanked out when it went into pieces. So I'm just going to validate that landing gears work. The nose gear does work. I tested that. It's got the Flightline blue box here, and so some of it, fiddling with it a little bit to make sure that what works as far as the gears and elevator or all the servos, what's really damaged. So first thing, break them down into individual groups, then start testing. In this case, I can't just throw a servo tester on this because it has the blue box. So I have to test it if everything connected to the blue box. Then going to start on the wing and just make the repairs, make new cables, get things tidied up, re-glued, get the wing back to original shape. Then move on to the next component, probably the fuselage and or maybe the tail. We'll see what happens, but I'll take you along the whole way. So tried using my servo tester and just connecting the landing gear wires up to my servo tester, and that's not going to work. And a lot of times what happens is in the blue box, yes, you're running, a signal wire, the 5 volts and the ground, but in the blue box, it divides things up. You'll see there's a lot of stuff going on. So then instead, what I'm going to do is just bind that receiver to my radio and see if I can get things work through my radio, because since I don't have my buddy's radio. So we'll just rebind it and start playing that route instead of trying to play play the guessing game with the power distribution in the blue box. Well, as you can see, we've got the gears working. Nose gear's functional. My servo works. So now, okay, so great. Servos are all working. Haven't tested the tail yet, but we're getting there. All right, on the wing, to be honest, the only thing that's goofed up is this little tank on the side with the lights on it. it got a little crinkled. So I'm going to use a little warm water and try to get the crinkles out. Those pins right here were a little messed up, but nothing was broken. I'll test the connections and all that, but for the most part, we could be okay. I want to test the connections, though, before I glue everything back together, because if I have to redo anything, there's no other way to do it. Yeah, so first, I'm going to test the electrical part of this, and then we'll glue it together. So we'll see how that goes. All right, I got that plugged into basically the distribution board. I pulled the plugs out and put it in the light controller, and just to double check to make sure everything's working properly, and it is. So I can clean up the foam, get everything nice and pretty, glue it together, and I don't have to worry about making sure that the connections didn't work. So anyway, problem solved. Another creative way, right there, glued that this tank on, and wanted to make sure it was nice and tight while that E6000 dries. So you had to sometimes get creative with how you're doing things, and this is just one of those cases where hopefully we'll get a good, a good line on there. We don't want it to be exposed or a big crack in it. There's going to be some, heck, it got ripped off. But anyway, just kind of helping get creative with clamping. All right, really rigid foam. I mean, this stuff is very thick, pretty dense. And I'm just going to take a couple rubber bands. You put rubber bands around this without the foam, and you'll basically damage everything. The rubber bands will dig in pretty badly. So to minimize that, try to get that seated just right so it doesn't slip. Sometimes these things don't work the way they're intended. They slip, go all over the place. But a lot of times just kind of getting creative with how you clamp things together works well. The other thing I want to do is just make sure, looking underneath, that that's all lined up. So I got a little E6000 in there, and gonna wait, probably an hour or so. It's getting later, so I could just leave it tonight. Anyway, just wanted to kind of clue you in on what I'm doing there to make a special repair. Horizontal stabilizer looks perfect, great condition. Only problem we're dealing with is we've got redo some extension lines. That guy got sliced off. And this one, who knows what happened to this one. I mean, that was a heck of a violent destruction. So all I got to do is make some new cables for that, and that should be no big deal. All right, fixed the connectors, soldered, got new connectors set up, and now we're just double checking the servos. I'm going to work the cycle a couple times with my servo tester just to double check. Maybe run that for a little while just to make sure. I mean, probably no damage whatsoever, but we'll test a couple things and move to the next project. Start on the vertical stabilizer here. Obviously that got damaged pretty good. There were a lot of additional parts that ripped off the fuselage, and you can see that got a little bit of a bend here. So we're gonna put it, hit it with some water, hot water, and see if we can get the creases out, get it straight, and then start gluing parts in, because this part is not, and that needs to be structurally pretty sound for this plane. So got some work to do there. Nothing too much, just remake a connector, straighten it, glue it, and clean her up a little bit. Hopefully we'll get this sorted out soon. All right, tail section. So a lot of creases all over it. So I've hit it with a steamer, and to try to work out some of the dings. This little area right here, the piece came off. It's glued in, this whole base part, and that little, there's a hard plastic, a hard point where it screws in to the fuselage slash tail section. Anyway, I'm gonna hit the, I already glued this up with E6000. Gonna wait tomorrow. I'm gonna start working a little bit more on some of the creases, see how much of it I can get out. I mean, you know, this is kind of a build where it's, you know, we're not going to buy a part. We're not buying parts. For $33, we can buy a new vertical stabilizer, but I'm going to try to get this fixed up without spending any dollars on something like that. So we'll see. Need to make new cable connections. So we are going to strip these wires off. And I twirl the wires a little. Use my crimper. It's going to be hard to do on camera. There's a little bit of a technique involved. And good eyesight. Okay, got those. Got a new connector. And we're going to do signal wire, power, and ground. There we go. We got a new connector. Right there is supposed to go. This piece holds the vertical stabilizer on, ripped off during the ejection of said vertical stabilizer. Anyway, this had a bunch of glue on it still that just, you know, good idea. Take off the glue, rough up these surfaces. I'm going to make sure that these surfaces are a little roughed up. Put some E6000 in there, light coat, get this in there, make sure it's in there nice and straight and perfect, and go to the next thing. That's this whole process. Just keep going from one thing to another. You know, finding out how everything fits, piecing it together one major part at a time. Right now, you know, the wing is drying, fuselage is getting a little attention, a little cleaning. All right, couple pins, trying to get it as good as I can. Over here it's a little dented in, so might have to paint that a little bit. We're trying to smooth that out, but the other plastic parts are all in, and I think we're gonna call it a night. See what it looks like in the morning. One of the things that I do when I inspect is I look at all the, obviously all the damage, and I highlight some things, because I'm not going to remember it all as I'm gluing. So I like to highlight the parts that need to get glued back together again. So I'm going to get those all glued up now, and then after that dries, we're gluing the rest of it back together. So the halves will be together. Then it's a matter of assembling, testing a couple things, trying to cosmetic issues, and we'll be able to maybe get this thing in the air pretty soon. All right, big clamping job for a big mess. So got out some bigger clamps, used some tongue depressors, the ones I used for my glue test. I had them laying around. Anyway, use those to protect the foam while that gets clamped together. That little piece right there required a little additional clamping. Unfortunately, it might mess up the foam a little. I'm not too worried about it. Here, just a lot of strategic work with the syringe, shoving the glue E6000 in and pinning everything together. So that'll set overnight, and we're almost there. So went to have a little dinner, came back, and this area right in here was not, these pins weren't holding it in well enough. So another creative clamping, use an M3 screw in there, M3 screw there, rubber band attach it, and that basically is pulling that into there. Got a little lead on here to keep it down from that direction, because this is kind of pulling it up a little bit. Regardless, got to get creative with clamping sometimes. And the other thing to note, come back 30 minutes later to see if everything is still the way it should be, because sometimes things change. So here's the fuselage. getting ready to do the glue up, getting this thing glued back together. Brakes right here, and what I'm trying to do is make sure when I glue this together, how can I basically clamp this fuselage together in a way that all the joints, all the seams that are broken, throughout this thing still basically go together straight. That's the big part. How am I going to make this so everything is nice and straight? And so kind of doing some thought on putting some weights in the back to push forward to make sure everything is nice and flush on the seam. There's some crushed parts there that won't be perfect, but more importantly is just that it's nice and straight. So we'll see. All right, got a syringe with a bunch of E6000, got a brush. I figured out how to get this thing to clamp up, kind of creative. I'll show here in a second, but first, I'm gonna put the camera away for a second while I get all the surfaces covered with the E6000, brush it in, and then put everything together. Make sure all the seams are tight, get it clamped, and then wait. All right, here we are. All right, glued up, brush it in, and I'm just making sure all the seams. This is a nice clean break right here. We lucked out on that. And then it comes up to here. Goes down, around, and down here. Underneath, I've given a lot of good inspection. Got this clamping system, again, being creative with clamps, making sure that those pieces align better. Little large pins and rubber bands to kind of make sure that that holds together. I'm gonna let it sit for a little bit, come back, check it. Got weights in here to kind of just hold things in place so they don't move around too much. Okay, so here's where we are. I've reassembled a lot of it, not all of it yet. This glue still needs to go. I'm not gonna beat it up or do too much more on it today. I'm gonna give it another day to really solidify. Had some issues here with some paint. That was all really pretty bad shape. So I hit it with some flat black, pulled up some, got some olive drab just to kind of go over that. Not pretty. I call it a 10-foot repair. It looks good at 10 feet. So that's kind of what we're dealing with. But everything glued up pretty straight. I've checked out some stuff. Things are looking good there. Plan to get the wing on here soon and start testing to make sure all the control surfaces, motor, everything works okay. And next step will be pretty much just getting it back to my buddy. Canopy glue for the canopy. So it busted off a little bit, scraped up. I cleaned the inside, glued some pieces back together. Not much you can do about it unless you wanted to order a new one, but let's just get that glued back on. With the canopy glue, it takes a while to cure, but that's a good thing, and it doesn't mess up the clear plastic. So let's see what we can do. Hey, just a word of interest, caution, whatever you want to say. When you put the wings and all these pieces back together, it's really important that things line up properly. So as you look down the plane and you look at where the wing is, and is the wing parallel to the tail section? It's really important that that is the case. So that's just showing that, as you're doing things, you could put a little shim in the wing to make it align with the tail section, or vice versa, whichever worked out best. All right, wanted to walk you through the rebuild on this. Pretty simple, really. As you notice that this was all broken up and took those pieces out. I flipped the whole thing upside down, re-glued the part that was broken over here. I didn't want that. Structurally, it's fine because I put reinforcing ply, thin ply, like 1/32 underneath this section there. Glued it with CA. Wood is fantastic. So went with that route. Super strong. Flipped it over. Got some my white shelf liner in there, nice and pretty. Also, I'm a big fan of making things look good, so zip tie a bunch of the connectors together, make sure everything's lined up nice. The antenna for the 631 is actually a straw that's in this very top section. So antenna's probably somewhere up here. Thought that was the place that was out of the way of most things and get the best connection, because there is a fair amount of carbon fiber running in here, and I just didn't want to run it across that. Anyway, the other part, obviously painted this and painted this section here because some of the paint lifted off, so did the best I could. Another skill that I need to work on is painting. But anyway, that's pretty much it. Of tools. The table of tools, basically, of all the stuff that I used to rebuild, whether it's the screwdrivers, soldering iron system, steamer, multimeter, being able to make your own cables, kind of a big deal, or redo the connectors, big deal. Clamping options, as you saw, I use a lot of different clamps, different types of glues, paints, skill I'd really like to work more on, and some testing, more testing equipment from a servo tester, as well as the light systems. The LED lights can be very sensitive. Most electronics can be sensitive to how many volts you're putting through. So you could fry things out that used to work, and as you're testing, you ruin them. So cautious of that. Anyway, you know what? I appreciate you watching the video. Hope you like it. If you have any comments, let me know. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.